The morning air at Arlington National Cemetery was cool and still. The rising sun painted the white marble with soft gold, and the sound of a single pair of boots echoed through the plaza. Each step was measured, calm, and perfectly in rhythm. The man walking that path was Sergeant Michael Hayes, one of the tomb guards of the unknown soldier. He had trained 4 years for this honor. Every movement had been drilled until it became second nature, exact steps, precise turns. The motion of the rifle, the tilt of the chin. There was no room for pride or ego here. Only respect, discipline, and silence. The tomb was sacred ground, where men rested who had no names, no families to visit their graves. Only these guards who promised never to forget them. Michael carried that promise deeply in his heart. His face was calm, but inside he carried a lifetime of memories of friends lost in battle, of nights when the noise of war had been too loud to bear, and of the moment when he received the Medal of Honor from the President himself. That medal, gleaming softly above his heart, was not for pride. It was for those who didn't make it home. Visitors often came and went. Some were quiet, some whispered, some took photos, but most could feel the respect in the air. It was like the space around the tomb itself demanded silence. On that particular morning, though, something unusual happened. Among the visitors was a tall man in a dark suit and sunglasses, standing with 2 aides near the viewing area. His name was Judge Richard Mallory, a powerful federal judge known for being strict, proud, and always needing to be in control. At first, he simply watched the ceremony. The sharp turns, the rifle inspections, the perfect rhythm. Then his eyes caught the metal glinting on Michael's uniform. He frowned slightly, whispering something to his aide. His tone was sharp, the kind of voice used to giving orders and expecting instant obedience. When the ceremony ended, Michael turned and began his slow walk back along the path. As he reached the edge of the plaza, he saw the man step forward. The judge raised his hand, signaling him to stop. "Soldier," he said firmly, "you are wearing a Medal of Honor during official ceremonial duty. That's a violation of uniform regulation." Michael stopped. His posture remained perfect. He looked straight ahead, his voice calm. "Sir, this medal was awarded for service and sacrifice. It is authorized to be worn on all official uniforms." The judge took off his sunglasses. "Not under my observation," he said coldly. "This is a federal site. I order you to remove it immediately." A small group of visitors began to watch. The air turned tense. Even the birds seemed quiet. Michael didn't flinch. "Sir, with respect, this medal isn't decoration, it's remembrance. I wear it to honor my brothers who fell beside me." The judge crossed his arms. "Rules are rules, Sergeant. You will follow lawful order or face consequences." Michael's heart tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "Sir, the tomb guard does not act out of fear or pride. We act out of duty. I cannot remove it." The judge's face turned red. "Then I'll have you cited for misconduct. You'll face a hearing for insubordination. You soldiers think your medals make you untouchable." Michael didn't respond. He simply saluted, turned sharply, and resumed his post. The visitors whispered. Some looked angry, some confused. A few veterans among them muttered that the judge had gone too far. That evening, the story spread faster than anyone expected. A tourist had recorded the confrontation on their phone, and the video went online. Within hours, thousands of people had seen it. Comments poured in from veterans, families of fallen soldiers, and ordinary citizens. People couldn't believe that a judge had tried to order a Medal of Honor recipient to remove his medal at the tomb of the unknown soldier. By morning, the story had reached the news. Reporters camped outside the cemetery. The military tried to remain silent at first, but the public outcry grew louder. The judge, however, didn't back down. He released a statement claiming he was upholding uniform standards, and that no one is above the rules. When Michael was called to appear before the court for a disciplinary hearing, he didn't complain. He simply polished his uniform, checked his shoes, and placed the Medal of Honor exactly where it belonged, right above his heart. The courthouse was filled that day. Veterans lined the hallways. Reporters waited with cameras ready. People wanted to see the man who had dared to defy a judge for the sake of honor. As Michael entered, the crowd went silent. Every eye turned toward him. He didn't swagger or smile. He simply walked with quiet dignity. His steps echoed the same way they did on the marble of Arlington. Judge Mallory sat at the bench, his face expressionless but his eyes sharp. "Sergeant Hayes," he began, "you have been called here for refusing to follow a lawful order. Do you understand the seriousness of this action?" Michael nodded once. "Yes, sir, I understand." The judge leaned forward. "Then why did you defy a direct command?" Michael's voice was steady. "Because the command was not lawful, sir. The Medal of Honor is not a decoration to be removed on someone's order. It's a symbol of sacrifice and duty. It belongs not to me, but to every man who didn't return." The judge's tone grew sharp. "You are not here to give speeches, Sergeant. You're here to answer. Did you or did you not refuse my instruction?" "I did, sir," Michael said calmly. With respect, whispers spread around the courtroom. A woman in the back, the wife of a fallen soldier, wiped her eyes. A veteran in uniform clenched his jaw. The judge sighed dramatically. "Very well. If you will not acknowledge authority, you leave me no choice but to hold you in contempt." Before he could strike the gavel, a voice from the back called out, "Your Honor." That would be a grave mistake. Everyone turned. A tall man in full-dress uniform walked down the aisle. The ribbons on his chest told the story of their own campaigns, valor, years of service. He was General James Collier, commander of the Arlington Honor Division. His presence made the entire room straighten. Even the guards saluted as he passed. "General Collier," the judge said, frowning, "you're interrupting a legal proceeding." With respect, the general replied firmly, "I'm here because your proceeding itself disrespects the foundation of this country." The courtroom went silent again. Michael stood still, eyes forward. The general continued, "Sergeant Hayes has done nothing wrong. He followed the code of the tomb. You, sir, tried to order him to break it." The judge shifted uneasily. "This is not a military court." "Then perhaps it should be," the general interrupted, his tone like steel. "Because you're trying to punish honor itself." Reporters began to type quickly. The air was electric. Even the judge seemed to realize the room was turning against him. Still, pride held his tongue firm. "General," he said, "we all serve the same law." "No," Collier said quietly. "Some of us serve something higher: sacrifice, integrity. And those who can't speak for themselves." He turned toward Michael. "Sergeant Hayes, you may stand at ease. You've done your duty." Michael relaxed slightly, though his expression didn't change. The general looked back at the judge. This man earned his Medal of Honor rescuing his wounded men while under fire in Operation Iron Dune. He carried 2 of them through collapsing tunnels while calling air support to save an entire convoy. Why? He almost died doing it. That medal isn't jewelry, it's a reminder that freedom costs lives. The judge blinked, his confidence fading. The general's voice grew softer but stronger. "You tried to take that away. You tried to make it about rules and pride. But that medal doesn't answer to either. It answers to duty." The room was still. For the first time, the judge had no words. Michael didn't look for victory. He didn't even look up. He just stood there, quiet as ever. Outside, the crowd waited. News cameras rolled. When the hearing ended, Michael walked out into the sunlight, surrounded by silent applause. Veterans saluted him as he passed. Families waved small flags. A child on her father's shoulders whispered, "That's the tomb guard." He didn't stop or speak. He simply nodded once, then continued walking toward the waiting car that would take him back to Arlington. He had a shift to stand as the car drove past the long rows of white stones. He looked out the window. The sunlight glimmered off the marble, and he whispered softly to himself, "This is for you, brothers, always." When he returned to his post later that day, he walked the same 21 steps, paused the same way, turned, and walked back. Nothing had changed about his rhythm. The only difference was the crowd. Dozens of people watched silently, some saluting, some with tears in their eyes. His medal caught the light again, steady, bright, and unbroken. The tomb guard marched on, unmoved by arrogance or pride, carrying the weight of honor in every step. And though the judge had power in the courtroom, everyone who saw that moment knew exactly who carried the real authority that day. The man who stood in silence, guarding the unknown, wearing the symbol of sacrifice that no one on earth could ever take away. When the hearing ended that day, Sergeant Michael Hayes returned quietly to his quarters. He didn't celebrate, didn't speak to reporters, and didn't post anything online. He just cleaned his uniform and placed his medal carefully inside its small blue velvet box. He ran his fingers over the golden star and thought of the faces of his men, the ones who never came back from that last mission. The world, however, was not quiet. News channels replayed the scene from the courthouse again and again. Every headline told the same story. Judge orders war hero to remove medal, backlash explodes nationwide. Social media overflowed with outrage. Veterans organizations released official statements demanding an apology. Even members of Congress spoke out, saying the incident insulted every soldier who had ever served. The judge, Richard Mallory, tried to stay firm. He appeared on a news interview the next day, saying coldly, "Discipline requires rules, and no one, not even a war hero, is above the law." His tone was confident, but his eyes betrayed unease. He didn't expect what came next. By evening, thousands of people gathered outside the courthouse with flags and banners. Some carried photos of their loved ones who had served. Others brought flowers to honor the tomb guards. They stood in silence for one full hour, no shouting, no chaos, only quiet respect. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. Meanwhile, at Arlington, Michael prepared for his next shift. As he dressed, one of his fellow guards, a young soldier named Evans, looked at him with pride. "You showed them what honor means, Sergeant," he said softly. Michael shook his head. "No, son, I just did what I was trained to do, stand firm when it matters." When he stepped onto the plaza again, the crowd was larger than ever before. Hundreds of visitors had come to see him march. Some had driven from other states after hearing the story. As he took his first 21 steps, the entire area fell silent. The soft sound of his boots echoed like thunder in their hearts when he turned. The medal caught the light of the sun, glowing faintly over his heart, a symbol not of defiance, but of loyalty and remembrance. Far away, in Washington, D.C., the Department of Defense held an emergency review. The Secretary of the Army demanded to know how a civilian judge could threaten a Medal of Honor recipient for following protocol. Letters poured into the courthouse, letters from retired generals, from families of fallen soldiers, from veterans who could barely hold a pen but still wrote their thanks. Days later, Judge Mallory received a sealed letter at his office. It was marked with an official emblem. Inside was a notice from the Judicial Review Board. His actions were under investigation for abuse of authority and public misconduct. His staff grew nervous. Phone calls from reporters didn't stop. One of his aides quietly resigned. Mallory's pride began to crumble. The man who always believed he was untouchable was now facing the weight of public opinion. At the same time, Michael's life changed too, but in a very different way. He never sought fame, yet it found him. Schools invited him to speak about service and sacrifice. Veterans' homes asked him to visit. When he spoke, his words were simple. Courage is not about fighting back. It's about standing firm when you're told to bow. People listened. Many cried. One afternoon, Michael received a message that a special meeting was scheduled for him at the Pentagon. When he arrived, several senior officers were waiting, along with General James Collier, the same man who had defended him in court. The general smiled warmly. "Sergeant Hayes," he said, "your conduct has reminded this nation what true honor looks like. The Secretary has asked that you represent the tomb guards at the National Memorial Service next month." Michael hesitated. "Sir, I'm not sure I deserve that." Collier looked him in the eye. "You earned it the day you refused to take off that medal." Michael nodded humbly. He didn't think of it as a reward. He thought of it as another duty, one more chance to show respect to those who could no longer stand guard themselves. A few weeks later, the National Memorial Service took place. Thousands attended. The president, senators, generals, and citizens all gathered before the tomb. Michael stood silently. rifle in hand, eyes forward. When his name was mentioned, the crowd rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. He didn't smile. He simply lowered his head, honoring those whose names were unknown but whose sacrifice was eternal. After the ceremony, an elderly man in a wheelchair was brought to him. He wore an old Marine cap and a chest full of faded ribbons. His voice trembled. "Son, I served in Korea. I thought this country had forgotten what respect meant. You proved me wrong." Michael saluted him quietly. "Sir, we never forget." As the weeks passed, Judge Mallory's situation worsened. The investigation concluded that his behavior was disrespectful to a decorated serviceman and damaging to public confidence. He was stripped of several duties and forced to make a formal apology. The apology was televised, though his pride made it sound stiff. "I regret any offense caused by my words," he said, avoiding the camera. "I have learned that respect must be shown to those who serve." But even as he spoke, few believed his words came from the heart. The damage was done. His reputation was ruined. Invitations to major cases disappeared. Colleagues distanced themselves. The man who once demanded obedience was now ignored. For Michael, however, life returned to its quiet rhythm. He still woke before dawn, still polished his boots until they reflected light, still walked those 21 steps in rain, heat, or snow. The tomb never changed, and neither did his duty, yet deep down, something had changed in the hearts of the people. Visitors came not just to see the ceremony, but to see him. They whispered his name with respect. Children pointed and said, "That's the man who stood for what's right." Sometimes, when the plaza was empty at night, he would look at the tomb and think of everything that had happened. He didn't feel anger toward the judge anymore. He felt pity. He didn't understand. Michael whispered to himself. He thought power was about control, but it's really about responsibility. One evening, as he prepared for another shift, a young recruit approached him nervously. "Sergeant Hayes." The recruit said, "I was scared to join after hearing how tough the training is. But after what you did, I decided I want to serve here. You showed us it's about something bigger." Michael smiled slightly. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about the men who rest there and the promise we made to them outside." The flag fluttered in the cool wind. The setting sun turned the sky orange and gold. The marble shone like fire, and the world seemed to hold its breath as he began his watch again. Meanwhile, Judge Mallory's life took a quiet turn. Without public respect, he retired early. Some say he moved to a small town where no one recognized him. Occasionally, he would sit on his porch, watching the news. When he saw a story about the tomb of the unknown soldier, he would sigh and whisper, "I was wrong." Years later, during a Veterans Day broadcast, a reporter told the story of Sergeant Hayes again, how he stood his ground with quiet dignity, how a judge tried to order him to remove his medal, and how that simple act of courage reminded the nation what true honor means. People still remember that story. Teachers tell it to students. Veterans tell it to their families. It became more than an event, it became a lesson. One winter morning, long after the controversy had faded, Michael walked to the tomb alone. Snow covered the ground, soft and pure. The cemetery was silent except for the crunch of his boots. He stopped before the marble slab and rested his hand gently on it. "You're still watching," he whispered softly. "And so am I." He straightened, took a slow breath, and began his watch again. His medal glimmered faintly in the cold light, somewhere beyond the horizon. The world kept moving, busy, loud, distracted, but here, at this sacred place, time stood still. He walked 21 steps, turned, paused, and walked again. The same motion, repeated for generations. A promise that never ends. And though many people had forgotten the name of the judge, everyone still remembered the guard of the man who stood in silence and taught the world that real power doesn't come from authority or titles, but from quiet honor that never bends. The tomb guard's story spread across generations. Families told it around dinner tables. Veterans halls framed his photo, and young soldiers learned about him during training. His calm defiance became a symbol of strength without anger, courage without arrogance, and faith without words. As he grew older, Michael still served as long as his body allowed. When the day came for him to retire, the ceremony was simple but deeply emotional. The crowd gathered once more at Arlington. The same marble plaza where he once stood in silence now echoed with applause. The general who had once defended him spoke briefly. "This man reminded us that medals are not metal, they are memory." Michael, still standing tall despite his gray hair, looked out over the crowd. He didn't speak about the judge or the controversy. Instead, he simply said, "I did what any soldier should do, stand for what is right." Even when standing alone, the crowd rose in silence. A tear rolled down the cheek of a young cadet in the front row. Somewhere in the back, a veteran saluted with trembling hands. When the band played taps, the sound drifted through the air, soft and haunting. Michael closed his eyes and whispered a prayer for his brothers. Years later, when people passed by the tomb, some would pause and look at the guards in perfect formation. Someone would whisper,